I know one thing Tate does mention too, and I've read this in the book, in this book too, and it's also, sometimes I think Tate gets a lot of his material from the Bible itself. And
It'd be the Quran now.
Yeah, Quran, that's true. But they talk where men, they don't so much need love, they want respect. Like if they had to choose between love and respect from their mate, from their wife or their girlfriend, they would choose respect. And men aren't really, love is whatever. Just respect me when I come home. I'm willing to die for you. If somebody broke in the house, I would die to protect you. Just respect me. And if men don't get respect, that's when problems come up. Women need love. They want to be loved and adored and everything else. Men, different. Interested in your take on that.
So I had a psychotherapist called Adam Lane Smith on my podcast, and he has dealt with attachment issues and depression from both men and women for decades. Mm-hmm. He's been a clinical worker. And he said that male depression gets treated like female depression. Men are made to feel loved and accepted when all they want to do is feel capable and powerful. Mm-hmm. And he used this example of the Blitz in World War II. So the Germans are coming over and they're bombing London. And before the war started, there were these psychiatric wards and they had patients in. These patients had been catatonic for years, totally comatose, unresponsive. And the nurses would come in, feed them, roll them over, clean the bedpan, wash them, leave them again. Mm-hmm. These men, mostly men, had been completely unresponsive. Then the Blitz starts. And bombs are being dropped. And one of the problems that you had was that a lot of the men had already been taken off to war. They were already working in jobs. A lot of the women were also working, nurses, or looking after kids down in bunkers and in the underground, trying to protect them from the bombs. Mm-hmm. So there were fires and there were injuries all over London. And there were ambulances and fire engines, and there was no one to drive them. These men, who had been catatonic for 5 years and a decade, got up,
rose to the challenge,
put their shoes on, went outside, and started driving fire engines and ambulances. These men that had been unresponsive for years and years and years.
Because they had purpose.
And that's what Adam said. Adam said that give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile. And I think that feeling capable and powerful and competent and respected and admired is something that will get a man so far. You give a man those things and he'll deal with suffering until the ends of the earth. We're designed to do that. We're designed to suffer. We're designed to deal with that suffering, but it needs to be in service of something.
Yeah.
You know, the man that suffers and doesn't have competence, capability, purpose, respect, meaning, admiration, that's a man that's depressed. That's a man who is alone and struggling and may take his own life, or may become increasingly useless to the potential partner and society around him, or may become radicalized, you know, in one form or another. And a man who is able to do things well is useful to everybody around him. One of the problems that you have is because there is a very small but pretty vicious cohort of men who do bad things to other people and women especially. In the same way as you said, you know, 90% of CEOs are white men, therefore all white men are having it great.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is, like 0.1% of men or 0.05% of men or something commit sexual violence acts. Therefore, all men are predators.
Right.
What you do is you smear all of masculinity with the example of its most egregious transgressors. The problem that you have there is, what baby have you thrown out with the bathwater?
Right.
If in order to make a society where a very small cohort of men is no longer going to misbehave, you have to make all men sedated and useless, what do you want? Like, what is it that you want? And this is a really interesting question. So going into my evolutionary psychology obsession at the moment, there's a dynamic called young male syndrome. And young male syndrome describes a society in which there is a large cohort of unmarried, childless men, usually young men. This happens sometimes if there has been selective breeding, if women, or if parents for some reason have chosen to have more male than female sons. You're seeing this in Japan and China at the moment. Or it could be if there has recently been some sort of catastrophe which has affected women more than men. Perhaps it was a cold snap and women were able to fend off this sort of cold a little bit less effectively. And throughout history, when you have this preponderance of men, also another one will be what's called a gerontocracy, which is where polygynous relationships and mating is reserved only for the older men.
I see.
And the younger men would tend to have to go through a bunch of trials and tribulations and stuff. And it's until you get to 35 that you actually are allowed to mate. Well, it's the young men mate on the side in any case, but they resent the older men. Basically, you have a large number of men, young men. Now, when you get into a relationship as a man, your testosterone drops. When you have children, your testosterone drops again. What this means is it reduces risk-taking behavior amongst men, and this would make sense. Like, if you now have to provide for first a wife and then kids, don't try and jump off that cliff and see if you don't die. Because if you leave behind some kids that aren't going to be able to fend for themselves, that's not good for your genetic line, right? So men's risk-taking behavior goes down when they get into a relationship and have kids, which means
testosterone goes down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which means that if you don't have many married men or men with kids, you have a greater increase in risk-taking behavior and testosterone. Men who are between the ages of whatever, like 17 and 28, let's say, just going around causing havoc, pushing over granny, graffitiing walls, and sometimes creating populist uprisings. Right? You know, this is the classic like gang mentality situation. The problem that you have at the moment is we have the highest rates of sexlessness amongst young men, I think, ever in history. The number of men reporting no sex in the last year has tripled from 8% to 28%.
Wow.
From 2008 to 2018. Roll that clock forward the next 4 years through the pandemic. I honestly think if you see a man on the street between the ages of 18 and 30 and you pointed at him, there would be a 50% chance that he hasn't had sex in the last year. That's not good, right?
What's that? What's going to happen? What's the result of this?
So most theories would suggest that you would have increasing societal instability. You'd have three things. Individual happiness drops because no matter how much of a hardcore men going their own way, like red pillar you are, there is a good amount of evidence that suggests having a companion, having friends, having connections is correlated with every outcome you want. Happiness, lifespan, health span, longevity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So people individually are going to be less happy. Societally, it should be less stable because of this young male syndrome that we've spoken about. You have less
More
reason
violent.
to buy in. Yeah, if your missus isn't going to keep tabs on whether or not you're fucking up the local gardens at night or whatever with your friends because you're just like playing football or whatever it is that you decide to do. And then civilizationally, you've got birthright problems. The one that we're talking about is the societal stuff. So we know that we've got increasing rates of sexlessness amongst young men.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen this huge preponderance of incel killings. You know, that's not to say we haven't had none, like Elliot Rodgers and blah, blah, blah. Most of the killings that do happen are coming from disaffected young men. But given that we've got as yet unseen rates of sexlessness, where are all of the terrorist events?
Yeah.
And my theory, which is the male sedation hypothesis, is that men are being sedated out of their status seeking and reproductive behavior through porn and video games. I think that they are getting a titrated dose, just a little trickle.
And medicated, didn't you?
Yes, medication as well is also happening. Yes.
I think I saw you put that up the other day.
Correct, yes. So that's from the newsletter. 2,000 hours a year. Men between the ages of 18 and 30 on average pay 2,000 hours a year of video games, and a good chunk of them, at least 50% of them, are doing it whilst on prescription meds or on weed. So young male syndrome, right? And this is a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier on. Let's say that there are two versions of the world. One in which the traditional young male syndrome of populist uprisings and dangerous men and stuff occurs, and the other one in which you've got my sedation hypothesis going on. Given the choice between the two, I would rather have men not be causing havoc and burning down buildings, but only by a little bit. Like, you have got an army of useless, sedated men who are not contributing to society, they're not working jobs, they're not innovating, they're not driving GDP, and every year that they continue to do the things that they're doing, playing video games whilst on weed, they become less and less of an attractive mate for the sort of partner that would drag them out of that in any case. So you have a choice here between men who are dangerous but competent or sedated but useless.
Yeah.
Every step I take, I move my truth. Every time they tell me stop, I use. Every comment, hate, that makes my fuel. Gather up my energy and boom. I hear them talking, saying the way that I move is so reckless. That is a part of my mind I've been blessed with. Giving my blood, so I am relentless. My fault, they want someone to blame. They sent their hate, it fuels my pace. I am Roy Tough, I am the change, the fuel in